Okay, welcome everybody to the Standards Board meeting, the 30th of July at 1800 hours. I'm just going to pass you over to Anthea so that she can go through the protocol of the Teams meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Due to the current COVID-19 regulations, today's meeting is held using audio conferencing and is available for the public to listen to via an audio feed on the agenda page on our website or via the Council's YouTube channel. This ensures that all those involved or interested in the meeting can hear how the decisions are made. Members and other participants, if there are any, should only speak when invited to do so. So if possible, could everybody ensure that the microphones are on mute whilst they are not addressing the committee? Anyone disrupting the proceedings will have their microphone muted or be removed from the meeting. And members, if you do have comments or questions, you're asked to use the hand raise facility if you wish to speak. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anthea. I'm going to ask everybody to indicate if they disagree rather than agree with things when I ask about acceptance of the minutes, etc. So first of all, I'm going to have apologies for absence, and I believe we've got Gilly Reynolds and Terry have sent apologies.
That's correct, Chair.
Yep. Declarations of interest. We haven't actually had any, so I'm assuming by the fact that nobody's indicated they've got a declaration of interest that there are none.
None, Chair.
No. I'm going to move on now to the Standards Board report of February. Items 3 to 6, a report from the Standards Board. And I'm going to ask someone if they feel it's appropriate and everything's correct to move the motion, the meeting minutes. And I'm going to ask for a seconder as well, please.
Councillor Seymour's indicating as proposer, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder there?
Councillor Scott is indicating, Chair.
All right, I've got two there. I'll take Councillor Scott there, okay? So everybody's quite happy with the minutes, February's minutes, yeah? So now I'm going to go on to page 7 for terms of reference 7 to 14. Can I ask that someone move and second these items? And are you all in agreement with that?
Yeah, I move. I'm agreed.
And I think Councillor Scott indicated as well, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Code of Conduct, Appendix 1. This section was considered in February. Do I need that again to be moved and seconded, I believe? No?
No, Chair. If you're happy, I can present the report to members.
Yeah, so I'll move over to Anthea now to present that report.
Thank you, Chair. Members might recall, those that were at the meeting in February this year, that the Committee for Standards on Public Life released a report in January 2019 in relation to the ethical framework for local government. That was reported to Standards Committee in June last year, and then we also had a session in February this year. One of those recommendations from the Committee on Standards for Public Life was that all authorities adopted the same model code of conduct. A lot of the recommendations made by the Committee on Standards in Public Life, rather than this committee, were recommendations that required legislative changes by government or responses from government. However, the model code of conduct is something that authorities can choose to adopt or not. So the Local Government Association, whilst they've been waiting for a government response to the recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life, have prepared a model code of conduct, and they are now asking local authorities for their views on that code of conduct. And there are a number of consultation questions. So Appendix 1 to the report is just for reference for members. That is the report, the full report from the Committee on Standards in Public Life, which this committee has already seen and considered. Appendix 2 is the model code of conduct that the Local Government Association, the LGA, are consulting on. Appendix 3 is a document that I have prepared. That is based upon the questionnaire that the LGA has released to undertake that consultation. And members will see that it's broken down into 3 sections. So column 1 is the questions that the LGA have asked as part of the consultation. Column 2 are my observations, comments, and perhaps some suggested responses in my role as monitoring officer. So that is to start the discussion this evening. And then column 3, we've got Jane here who's taking minutes, and she will fill those in as we go along, so that we've got a record of the discussion, and we can then deal with the submission to the LGA. Appendix 4 for reference is the current code of conduct that this authority has adopted and uses to deal with councillors' code of conduct and to consider complaints. So, Chair, I don't think there's much more for me to say in terms of presenting the report. There are 4 recommendations. The first 2 are that you consider the model code of conduct and note the comments that I've suggested in Appendix 3. Recommendation 3 is that you let me have the comments that you would like to start forming part of the consultation. And then recommendation 4 is that this committee delegates authority to myself in consultation with you, Chair, to finalise the submission of the consultation response to the LGA. Chair, it now falls open to members to consider and discuss the questions that are put forward as part of the consultation. But if it pleases you, Chair, I'm happy to go through those questions with members and take views as we go along.
Has anybody got any questions? Yes.
Councillor Seymour's indicating.
Yeah, it's easier than finding the hand on the barricade.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I've got quite a few comments to make as we go through the paper, so I would like to take them sort of more or less one by one. I mean, there's some obviously that I'm totally in agreement with, and others I think perhaps should be strengthened somewhat.
So would it be easier for you all to go through them, for Anthea to go through them one at a time and ask questions as we go through them, yes?
Yeah.
Is everybody okay with that? Anthea.
Thank you, Chair. So the questions start at page 143 of your agenda pack. The first 2, I'm not proposing to seek views on because I think they speak for themselves. It's what sort of council we are and the role of the person who's responding. So I think that speaks for itself. The third comment is based upon an observation that the Committee on Standards for Public Life made, and that is in relation to the capacity of a councillor and at what time the code of conduct applies to a member. So there is the current position is that the code of conduct only applies to a councillor when they are acting as a councillor. There's a lot of not confusion, but a lot of activity around member conduct from a public perspective. It can be situations where the code doesn't necessarily apply, and the key area for that is social media activity. And the recommendation from the Committee on Standards in Public Life is that the approach to the code of conduct should be widened so that it applies to members when they're acting as councillors, when they are purporting to act as councillors, and when they are acting on council business or representing council business. And so the comment that I made was simply that reflects the recommendation. The LGA's comments reflect the recommendation from the Committee for Standards on Public Life. That isn't a question, it's an observation. So it's just there as an explanation for members. The first question for members is...
May I make a comment at this point? Yes, I mean, I very strongly agree that this should be strengthened, because I liken it to anyone who holds a public office of any kind, or whether you're, for example, serving in the armed forces, as I did myself as an officer in the RAF. You are always in the RAF an officer. You know, there is never any time when you're not. And I feel that with being a councillor too, you are always a councillor. You know, a lot of people know who you are as a councillor. There may be some who don't, obviously, but you're easily identified as a councillor if you do anything out of order. And I personally think it should apply to us at all times.
Councillor Scott's indicating, Councillor Jones.
Councillor Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to disagree with Jackie, actually, but in the sense that I wrote to you, Anthea, recently asking for some advice, really, about this, because I think there are moments in our lives when we are just ourselves. And as long as we don't say, I, Councillor Peter Scott, think that, or whatever it is, I think we need to be and must be allowed an opinion on virtually anything, as long as it's clear that we are acting as ourselves as an individual and not as a councillor. So the notion that we are a councillor all the time, I feel, is completely wrong. We're entitled to an opinion, and we must express that, because as you yourself said to me, being part of a council actually means that we follow politics, for example, and we should have an opinion, and I think we should. So I wouldn't like to see us completely overwhelmed by any ruling that stops us being ourselves. Thank you.
Councillor Seymour, would you like to come back in?
Yes, I didn't for one moment suggest we shouldn't have opinions. Of course we'll have opinions. We're political parties, for heaven's sake. Of course we'll have opinions that may not agree with one another. But that's not the same thing at all. It's how you behave and what you actually, the way you phrase things, how you treat people. There's reference later to the civility and respect that you should. And I don't think there is any time at which that shouldn't apply. In that way, you are always a councillor, and anything you do that is out of line with that would whether you're doing it on a personal level or not, would reflect badly on both yourself and the council.
If I may just come back on that, Chair, what I'm referring to really is social media, particularly when people will say, to me certainly, they'll say, you can't say that, you're a councillor, or you can't say that, you're Mayor of Newport. And I feel, yes, I can say that, as long as I'm not, first of all, as long as I'm correct, and secondly, that I'm not abusive. So, there's a certain amount of personal freedom here, which I think might get lost if we were to be too difficult with any sort of ruling.
I'm going to bring in Councillor Arnold England.
Sorry, I'm unmuted. Yes, I agree with both councillors, because there are pros and cons in everything. And I would suggest that we take what is written and work with it, because we all know that as time goes on, some things are acceptable, deemed acceptable, some are not, and it will evolve and develop. And it said at the bottom of that little box, some complaints are dismissed by the monitoring officer, an independent person, etc. So as things develop, then we'll say, oh, no, in the case in 2021, it was shown that wasn't an offence, whereas in 2022 this was, that sort of thing. So I would accept the document, because it will evolve. Thank you.
I'm just going to add to that, there was a lot of debate in the training session on Zoom yesterday about this. Yeah. And it's obviously been discussed quite a lot. Would you like to come in again, Anthea?
Not at this point, Chair, because that section was just observation based on commentary from the LGA, but I think it's covered in some of the other questions, so we'll probably come on to it, and the questions might help drive the response in any event. So, Chair, if nobody else is indicating, question 1 is in relation to that point. So to what extent do you support the proposal that councillors demonstrate the behaviours set out in the code when they are publicly acting as, identifying as, and or giving the impression that they are acting as a councillor, including when representing the council on official business and when using social media. And the question is, to a great extent, to a moderate extent, to a small extent, not at all, don't know or prefer not to say. So I have suggested that members would possibly want to say to a great extent that they agree with that, but maybe from what I've just heard, not all members do. The reason I took that approach is that if you are holding yourself out as a councillor, even if it's in your private capacity, then members of the public will have an expectation that you behave in a certain way. And it covers things like it's to cover situations where, and I'm sure this would never happen in Telford and Wrekin, but where a member might, for example, say, you've got to let me into this pub. Do you know who I am? I'm the chair of the licensing committee, or something like that. And that's an extreme. But that's why I've suggested that you might want to be supportive of that. And I think Councillor England has said, yes, let's run with that. I think Councillor Seymour probably would like to see it go a bit further, but it would be helpful for me in preparing the consultation response if we could get an indication of some sort of consensus amongst the members that are here.
Councillor Seymour?
Yeah, so I will certainly go along with that. You know, I just feel that there should be great strength in there, but I think it, nevertheless, that what is happening is a considerable strengthening of the code, and I am fully supportive of that.
What I will say is that it has moved on greatly from where it was years ago,
Absolutely.
where you did say, don't you know who I am? Or people did say. It has moved on greatly from that, and we're in a very different world now. So I would support it. And anybody want to indicate that they're not willing to support it? No? So I'll take that one as carried then, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of elaborating, I also said that, and this is me with a monitoring officer hat on, the wording giving the impression that they are acting as a councillor might leave it open to interpretation and place the burden on the monitoring officer. So unless members indicate otherwise, I intended to just make that comment to see if there could be some guidance or some helpful hints and tips to help monitoring officers in the interpretation. So if members are happy with that, then I don't need to discuss that further, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair. Question 2. Is it sufficiently clear which parts of the model code are legal requirements and which are obligations and which are guidance? Yes, no, or don't know. So my view, having read it, and I've looked at it several times and I've attended quite a few training sessions or discussion sessions now, is that although I think monitoring officers and members are likely to be able to identify the differences, for a lay person, and we have to remember that the code of conduct is there for members of the public to decide whether or not there's a complaint to be made or just to see how members should be behaving. I think for a lay person, it's not necessarily clear. And so that's my suggested response is no, because I don't think it's necessarily clear for all audiences.
Mm-hmm. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you. Question 3. Members might have seen when you've read the code of conduct, and those members that were able to attend the Zoom sessions that have been going on over the last week or so, and I think there's another one tomorrow, that the code is written slightly differently to what you might be used to, especially those that are quite long standing. So rather than it being members must not, members will not, members should not, or members will, members should, it's now written in the personal tense. So I will not, I will do something, I will make sure that. And the question is whether that's something that you like. Do you like it in the personal tense, or do you prefer the more passive tense? Councillors should not. It was an interesting discussion at the session yesterday, because the people who prepared the draft were of the view that it's essentially forming a contract with the members of the public. I've suggested we don't put a response into this because there's a section at the very end of the questionnaire where you can add more context, because I think getting the commitment from members that I and the personal tense is very good. And if members were signing up to it and asked to sign when they took office, that's good. But this also forms part of the Constitution. And I think in the Constitution, the use of the personal tense would be out of context and it wouldn't make much sense. So my personal view is if there is a desire to use the personal tense, that should be used as a member commitment, and the code in the Constitution should remain in the passive tense.
Councillor Jackie Seymour?
Yes, I would entirely agree with that. I think when I believe in the future we're going to have to sign this as we at the beginning of each election, and that should certainly be in the first person, and but other references I quite agree should be in the what do they call it, passive tense, yeah, or the third person, I would say, yeah, quite agree.
Just on the point of signature, there isn't actually a legal requirement for members to sign it, and unless there's a legislative change, that will stay the same. But I think as part of this move to trying to have more transparent ethical standards, the expectation is that authorities would expect and ask their members to be signing up to the code and to the commitment that they make a contract, essentially. So yes, at the minute there's no legislative requirement to do so, but if councils sign up to it, then the expectation would be that there'd be a signature for each member to it.
Yeah, I would actually hope that legislative change will be actually made. I think it would be a good idea.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any comments? No.
So, Chair, the next question's quite lengthy. If I was to read it all out, but I don't intend to do that. But members will have seen that the code's got 12 obligations, and I think most of those, although the wording might be slightly different, they shouldn't come as a surprise. So it's about treating people with civility, not bullying or harassing any person. But in the current world, the code of conduct is based on 7 principles of public life, the Nolan principles. So that's things like selflessness, integrity, honesty, and it's been expanded a little to be more to have more narrative, and it's been expanded into 12 principles. And the question is, to what extent do you support the 12 specific obligations that are set out? Great extent, moderate extent, small, not at all, not sure. And I've suggested various responses to each of those 12 obligations. So treating other members and councillors treating other councillors and members of the public with civility, I've suggested to a moderate extent. Now that might seem surprising initially, but it's around the use of the word civility. And Chair, if it's okay with you, I propose that we pick that up because I think there's actually a question about civility in any event. So it's just whether or not civility is the right phrase. Councillor England's indicating, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor Arnold's England?
Yes, I agree that we treat, where possible, fellow councillors with civility. I agree totally that we should treat officers and outside organisations with civility, because that's the right thing to do. But and I'll give you an example. You know, we've had a major issue about the hospital and losing our A&E and all the rest. I stood up in a public meeting as a councillor and told the decision makers what I thought of them. I certainly was not civil. Now, I think that where politics comes into it, there should be a separate section. I think when dealing with staff and people, yes, and I always do try to be civil and respectful, but when politics comes into it, if you totally disagree with something, then you can say so. Try to take the personality out of it, which I, as chair of the council, I do not like, but you can tell someone they're talking, shall we use the word rubbish, yeah, and that then is not being civil. So, and when your dander is up over something that's very important to your group or to you, then you will use strong language. Obviously, swearing is out of the question, but even occasionally that will slip out. So I do think that there needs to be an understanding that people who have a very strong feeling about a community issue like the hospital or a political issue should be given some ability to speak their mind. What do the others think?
Councillor Scott's indicating, Chair.
Councillor Scott? And then
Yes, thank
Jackie
you. Yeah,
Seymour.
I actually completely agree there with Councillor England in the sense that there will be moments when you'll lose your temper to a point, but I think all of us would show civility under normal circumstances with everybody, not just council officers or fellow members, but the general public at large. But there will be, and I think, though, that has to be taken into consideration should a complaint come to the monitoring officer, that it was at that point a very explosive moment. And as long as you don't really lose it, I mean, there's an issue there, but you should be able to express what would be a very heartfelt opinion. So, yeah, that, to me, what Councillor England has just said there makes complete sense. So, yes, to a point. We would still, I'm going back again, I think, to the fact that we are still individuals, we're still people, and we shouldn't be expected to act completely differently to everyone else because we're only human. Thank you.
Councillor Seymour?
Yeah, well, not surprisingly, I disagree with that. I think you can express opinions that are strongly opposed to other people without the need to swear, to be rude, to lose your temper, or because it just undermines your arguments, and therefore there cannot be any excuse for that.
Councillor Scott?
Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Scott.
No, yeah, sorry. Just to come back on that. Of course, Jackie, you are right in the sense that I hope I will never stand up in a public meeting and swear and shout and scream and blow my top. What I am suggesting, though, is we're all different and we're all human, and that could happen for very good and very important reasons. So let's not stop us, or one or two of us, because some of us are different in that respect. That's the way they act. But let's not say, no, you must never do that, because that character might just be the only way they can get their opinion over. But in the main, I think we would all have complete respect whenever we're speaking as councillors.
Thank you. Councillor Nathan England?
I think it's Arnold.
Oh, sorry, I thought Nathan had his hand up. Councillor Arnold England?
Yeah, he's the good-looking one. Right, the method of stating or being uncivil or bullying, all the rest of it, is a question. I'll give you an example. On a parish council, we talk to each other, and we include staff. And one parish councillor made a disparaging comment about another council. Right? And I thought, you can't do that. I did nothing about it. So it's the method, right? So you could argue that that is a private conversation because all the councillors are talking to each other, cross-party. Or you could say, no, that's a public debate because everyone's involved. So, again, it's like, I totally agree that when you're online, Facebook and all that, I've done it once or twice and I thought, no, I'm not doing that again. Not talking about politics or council work, but when you've got a group of councillors talking to each other and one says something that you find annoying, would that then be acceptable if I was to report that person for that comment?
Councillor Jackie Seymour?
When you're just talking to fellow councillors, it depends what situation you're doing it in. If it's in any way a public situation, then there can be no excuse for that kind of behaviour. But if you're just talking to your fellow councillors and there's no other members of the public there, then you know, you can get a little bit more heated. But there are some people who cannot control themselves, and I think you need to have some basic standards that, well, a little bit more than basic, that people are expected to keep to, so that things don't get out of hand. But you know, person to person discussions, you know, if you're not being overheard, then obviously things can get heated. But
I think I
purpose of
think
this code, we need to keep to the high standard.
I think everybody's pretty much in agreement that you do stick to a standard, but there are times, as we've all seen, where people can become quite passionate. And as Arnold England has pointed out, the hospital has been one recently. But I can't say that I've heard people being rude. They've made comments that are true and factual, and I think that's what it's more about than anything else. I'll go back to you, Anthea.
Yes, Chair, it's quite interesting listening to this discussion. And I think some of it, first of all, what I would say is don't forget the position that we're taking is it only applies if you're acting as a counsellor. So it's not the wider or holding yourself out to be, but not the wider perspective. But I think actually what I'm hearing is what is the definition of civility? What does civility mean? And that's one of the comments that I've made later in the consultation. So some might say swearing at somebody is not being civil. Others might think shouting at somebody is not being civil. And so one of the points I've made in one of the suggestions, and I can't remember which question it is that actually civility isn't really very clear what that means. So my experience of members is that I don't think I've ever heard an opinion expressed in a public meeting that hasn't been expressed in a civil manner, even where there's been significant disagreement in what one person might be saying and what another person might be saying. It's the nature of politics that quite often there are diametrically opposed views, and what the code is trying to achieve is that the discourse that takes place in that discussion is civil, albeit you can express strongly that you don't agree with somebody. So I think actually this boils down to what does civil mean? What does civility mean in this context?
Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that there will be a lot of training on this over the coming months once it is adopted and agreed.
Yes, Chair. So if it gets adopted, first of all, there will, as well as the code, the LGA are talking about releasing a lot of guidance to
Yeah.
give examples around this is what civility means, this is what bullying might look like, this is what harassment looks like. But then also the LGA will undertake or offer some sort of training. But my role as monitoring officer is that I have to promote high standards in public life. And so I will also be making sure that not only the borough councillors are trained, but parish and town councillors are offered some training as well.
I was going to move on to parish and town councils in that, really, I would like to see them all buy into whatever we agree to. I don't know if anybody can point out anything where they might need to look at things differently. No,
Yep.
no.
So, Chair, going back to the consultation question, can members just indicate, are they happy to say that they agree with principle 1 to a moderate extent, and then there's an opportunity to express a view on civility later in the questionnaire?
Agree.
Yes, I think so.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
The next one, well, we've done 1 and 2 in that discussion, so I'll move on. The third principle is not bullying or harassing any person. And so, Chair, I've suggested that members would probably say to a great extent they agree with that. But again, somewhere else in the questionnaire, I've suggested that bullying/harassing probably needs some sort of context and definition around it. And actually, my view is that there is a definition of bullying, and I'm not sure it necessarily covers all scenarios, but I know I've discussed it somewhere else in the document, so I won't labour that point. So it's just to say at this point, in response to these questions, I'm suggesting that's to a great extent that members would agree.
Yep. Anybody disagree now?
Yep.
The next one is not compromising or attempting to compromise the impartiality of anyone who works for or on behalf of the council. Chair, that's essentially the same as honesty, transparency, integrity in our current code. So again, I've suggested that's to a great extent because I don't really think that differs much from the current code that we have. It's just expressed differently.
We all in agreement with that?
Nods
Yep.
all around.
Yep.
Principle 5 is not disclosing information, confidential information, unless they've received the consent of the person who is authorised to give it, or you're required to do so by law. So members come across all sorts of information. Some of it's confidential in the work that they do, and this is just a commitment from members that they won't disclose that onwards unless they've got the permission of the person who can give that permission, or a court says they have to do that. And again, I've suggested that's to a great extent.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that one would go without saying anyway. I think the thumbs up is very good.
The next one is not preventing anyone getting information that they are entitled to by law. So this is kind of the converse of the one we've just discussed. So if somebody is entitled to some information by law, members are not going to prevent that from happening. It doesn't happen now. I've never seen a member prevent somebody getting information that they're entitled to. So again, I've suggested to a great extent for that one.
Thumbs up.
Principle 7 is not bringing the role of councillor or the council into disrepute. And again, I think this is already covered in our current code of conduct. It's just expressed in slightly different words. So again, I've suggested to a great extent for that one as well.
Thumbs up for that one.
Number 8 is, in my view, similar to number 4, which is not using or attempting to use the position of councillor improperly to the advantage or disadvantage of themselves or anyone else. Again, this is integrity, and I think is similar to not trying to abuse the impartiality of anybody working for the council. So again, I've suggested to a great extent for that one.
Can I just ask a question on that one myself? Would that be does that cover declarations of interest?
It could, but there's a separate obligation in the model code that covers declarations of interest. So this is I know which case this is referring to, and I'm not going to name it, but there has been a case in the last few years where an investigation took place at a council, and a member had been found to have been using their position to allow them and their family to purchase property at an undervalue, and placing pressure on officers to facilitate that and have their parking tickets and renounced and that sort of thing. So that's exactly what that's designed to protect against. And I don't think any member would have any concerns about that, hence why the great extent suggestion.
Yeah. Everybody, thumbs up for that one.
Number 9 is not misusing council resources. Again, I think that's already covered in our current code and also in legislation to an extent as well. So I've suggested that's to a great extent. That's not using council paper to write letters to your family who live in Australia, not using the council paid for telephone for things other than ward work, and maybe using ringing your relatives in Australia, for example. So again, to a great extent, I've suggested for that one.
Everybody got a thumbs up for that one?
Principle 10 is registering and declaring interests. Again, this is an obligation members already have. So again, I've suggested to a great extent. Chair, Councillor England's indicating.
Councillor Arnold England?
I've read through the papers, and that is one that appears to be over the top to me. I think there was reference to interests of friends or friends of friends. It's just, how far do you go? I would say immediate family, any business or work colleagues. My son's sitting here. I don't know what his mate is involved in, but he's my son's best mate. So how far do you go? I don't know.
Chair, can I respond to that?
Yes, by all means. Yeah, we did. I did hear the debate on that one yesterday.
Yes, so
Indeed.
you're absolutely right, Councillor England. And there's a question further on which deals with the specifics of the wording, or if it's not a question, in the response, the general catch-all, I've made comment around how the extent to which it goes. This is about the principle of declaring interests, and so I'm suggesting that although the wording of the requirement might need looking at, the principle of declaring interest is something that members agree with.
Yes, I think everybody's pretty much in favour of that.
Sorry, I've lost my place, so just bear with me a second. Number 11 is not accepting significant gifts or hospitality from anybody seeking to acquire, develop or do business with the council, or from people who might apply to the council for permissions, licenses or other significant advantages. And I've suggested that members would want to respond to say they support that to a great extent.
I've lost on my, I was going to say, and I've lost Peter Scott on my screen as
Yes,
well.
I have too. Yeah.
But I think very much, yeah.
And then the final principle was registering with the monitoring officer any gift or hospitality with an estimated value of at least £25 within 28 days of its receipt. We have that requirement in our constitution already. So again, I've suggested that, well, I've put to a moderate extent simply because I think the principle we agree with, but it doesn't cover any cumulative gifts. So if somebody gave you over the course of 3 months a £10 gift, a £1 gift, a £5 gift, a £10 gift, and that in itself it came to more than £25 in that period of time. At the moment, our requirement is that you declare cumulative gifts as well. And so I've said we agree with it to a moderate extent, but I think the wording should be inclusive of cumulative values as well. And again, I've covered that further on in the questionnaire. So if the principle is agreed, Chair, then I think we can move on.
Any objections to that? Thumbs up.
So question 5 in the consultation is the opportunity to add some information around those specific obligations. So the first comment is around civility. So I've said that the word, for me, I think the word civility seems a lower burden than respect. And at the moment, our code makes reference to treating people with respect. Having heard the debate yesterday, the view in the session that took place yesterday is that you can be respectful towards somebody and still not be civil. I think you can be civil to somebody and not be respectful. So it might just be it's subjective, isn't it? And I'm not sure we could discuss this till the end of time, and I'm not sure we'd necessarily get an agreement on which word means more. But it was just an observation, and I know the conversation yesterday spent a long time on that, and I can see Councillor Seymour's indicating.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it comes up later on as well, but I was going to suggest that we could perhaps say that both words should be used. I can't think of a word that you could easily use that is stronger. But if you were civil and respectful, then maybe it would just have a little bit more force than each one separately.
Everybody agree with that? I would agree with that because there was a lot of debate on that yesterday.
There was, yes.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a consensus. I don't think people could.
I was
because
confused.
it is so subjective. Yeah. Yes, yeah. And then the same for obligation 2 because it uses the same wording. And then obligation 12, which is the cap on the £25 gifts and hospitality, that's just going back to me saying about the cumulative total. Councillor Arnold England, I know you raised the comment around the declaration of interest. I've definitely covered it somewhere in here, just not in question 5. So and Jane has taken a note, so I'll make sure that's captured in any event. Question 6. So this is about presentation of the code. Would you like to see it presented as a long list of obligations, as you've seen now, and then the guidance as a separate document? Or would you like an obligation and then guidance about the obligation, next obligation and then the guidance? My view is that having two separate documents to consult potentially means you'll miss some of it. You'll read the obligations and not the guidance, or you'll read the guidance and not the obligations. So I think having it as one comprehensive document probably makes for easier reference rather than easier reading, easier reference. That was my comment.
Any other comments on that? No? No, I think everybody's happy with that one, Anthea.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not sure we need to discuss question 7 because it's to what extent do you think the concept of acting with civility is sufficiently clear? And I've suggested to a small extent because I think tonight has demonstrated that it is subjective. And then I've put in some narrative because question 7A is, do you have an alternative meaning? And I don't think we have. I think we've just heard that. But I've just said that the dictionary definitions of civility is politeness or courtesy, and of respect is to have a good opinion of someone. And that the nature of local government and politics is that people will have disagreements on complex issues, but they can be articulated in a civil and respectful manner. So I think that goes back to Councillor Seymour's comment about maybe the right approach is respect and civility.
Yeah.
Question 8, to what extent do you think the concept of bringing the council into disrepute is sufficiently clear? So one of the obligations is, I will not bring my role or the council into disrepute. And I've suggested to a small extent, and I don't think that's for members in this case, I'm thinking about members of the public. So the narrative that I've added later is that experience would suggest, in my role as monitoring officer, having heard complaints that come in about members, not just here, but in other authorities that I've worked, my experience would suggest that some members of the public think it's bringing the council into disrepute or bringing the role into disrepute to disagree with a political party or a political view, where that member of the public has sympathy with a particular party. And anybody who disagrees with that is not behaving in accordance with the code of conduct. So from a member of the public point of view, I think the phrase bringing the council or bringing the role into disrepute could do with some context, some narrative, some explanation.
Any comments on that one? Any thoughts? No, I agree with what you've said there, yeah.
I'm conscious this is a public meeting, so that's not to say that I think members of the public are not able to understand those concepts, but it's about making it clearer. This is not about the political discourse, and it's about actual disrepute. Councillor Scott and Councillor Seymour were indicating, but I'm not sure who was first.
Well, I was going to, yes, thank you. Only just to say that often in the past, I know a couple of complaints have come in about me over the last few years, purely on that basis that people disagreed with my view of a political notion. And I think that, we should be able to disagree. And I disagree with that person in a very civil manner. But they felt, and this is one of the big problems I think you have as a monitoring officer, sometimes people think, I'm going to go send it to the monitoring officer. That'll get him. I mean, we have to realise that we can disagree. And as long as we do it on a pleasant basis, then there's no problem. So I think putting it at the lower scale is right. I think the recommendation from yourself is right. There are limits, but people can't think that going through the monitoring officer is an easy way to get at a councillor.
Councillor Seymour?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think the word bringing the council into disrepute is reasonably well understood. And I'm sure that most people wouldn't consider that just disagreeing about something is going to do that, particularly in a political organisation. But again, it's how you do it, and that is the bit that that can be considered that could bring the council into disrepute if it's done in a way that is rude and angry and that kind of thing. You know, you wouldn't expect to see councillors behave like that. But I can't think of a way of phrasing it that would make it clearer to the public. But I'm sure most of them well understand what it is.
I think it might come down to the guidance that's going to accompany the code. But if we add the narrative, then it helps the LGA in preparing that guidance as well, and being able to frame it in a way that hopefully there's 300 or 400 councils who are responding to this, so there'll be a lot of views to take into account. And I wouldn't envy them their role, but if we give some narrative, at least they have an understanding of maybe some of the concerns. Just picking up on Councillor Scott's point, what I should say is, if there was a complaint came in like that, then the monitoring officer, and thankfully not alone, but with the independent person, our role is to do that kind of like a triage to see whether it passes the test to be a complaint to take forward, and that works fairly well, I think, at the minute with the independent person. But of course, it doesn't stop people trying to abuse the code of conduct and still have a complaint made. But my role and the independent person's role is to whittle out those frivolous or those vexatious complaints.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Chair
Councillor
Councillor
Nathan
Nathan England.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick one, really. It was thinking about the narrative, and would there be examples of what is bringing the council into disrepute and what wouldn't be? That was all.
Yes, so at the session yesterday, I should really say, I just keep referring to the session yesterday. So the session yesterday was held by the LGA, and they've had a few webinars over the last few days, and it was attended by the consultant who helped assist the LGA in drafting the code. There was attendance by the chair of the LGA, or the vice chair, I can't quite remember, their senior legal advisor, and then their policy advisor was there as well. And certainly the noises that they were all making is that the guidance would include some clear examples on all of the obligations. So I'm hopeful that if it does get adopted, the new code will be quite easy to read, quite friendly in the way that it's written, and it meets all audiences, and the guidance and the examples should help with that. It should be accessible. That was the word I was looking for. It should be accessible to all audiences, hopefully.
It was the vice chair,
Yes,
Marion Overton.
That's right.
Yeah, the vice chair for the LGA. I was also part of that session yesterday, and it brought more questions than answers to me, to be honest. And what come out really was quite a range. So I think they've looked at it very carefully, and there's going to be a lot of discussion going on before this comes to a conclusion.
It is a very long consultation period as well, and I think that takes into account the fact that actually I've underestimated it when I've said 400 councils, because that doesn't take into account all of the town and parish councils. So if you look across the country, England only, not Wales at the minute, but if you look across the country, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of councils at all levels who are being asked to respond to this. So there's going to be I would imagine a significant period of time where the LG are going to have to consolidate those consultation responses and then try and find a one-size-fits-all. So yes, it was a lot of questions yesterday, but I think that's reflective of the fact that we're in the consultation period, and hopefully things will become clearer.
Yeah, that was good though. Good.
The question 9 was the extent to which you support the definition of bullying and harassment used in the code. And then there's a supplementary question: if there are other definitions you'd like to recommend, then please provide them. So I suggested that you might want to consider a moderate extent that you support the use of the definition. So Chair, the definition, just to help, I'm just going to find it because I think the wording is important. The type's too small for me to read, so I'm just extending it. Sorry, even with glasses on. So bullying may be characterized as offensive, intimidating, malicious or insulting behavior, an abuse or misuse of power through means that undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. It might be a regular pattern of behavior or a one-off incident, happen face-to-face, on social media, in emails or phone calls, happen in the workplace or work social events and not always be obvious or noticed by others. Then it gives the Equality Act definition of harassment, which is unwanted conduct related to a protected characteristic which has the purpose of violating an individual's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment for that individual. So, Chair, that's the current suggested wording. In my response to that, and I'm just going back to the question and making the type bigger again. So my suggested response is that does it go far enough? And the reason I'm saying that is that so the wording as is proposed largely replicates the ACAS wording for harassment and bullying in the workplace. But some behaviour as a one-off might be acceptable and this is my view, but where it's over a prolonged period of time or it is repeated, it could then amount to bullying. So for example, we all work in a high pressure environment. Sometimes there's a need to complete work in a very short space of time. As a one-off or as circumstances require, that's acceptable. But if that then becomes an unreasonable expectation that you're completing your work within an hour of being given it, or whatever it might be, then that might extend into bullying. And then again, it's very subjective. It also doesn't make any reference anywhere to sexual harassment, and I think that's a big flaw, particularly in the current climate. So that was the narrative that I added, but again, I'm open to members' views on that.
Any comments on that one? No?
No, I just concur.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody with thumbs up. That one's... Oh, sorry, Councillor Arnold England, you'd like to come in there?
Yes, I don't want to prolong the discussion, but sometimes it's in the mind of the beholder, right? And there's an old phrase, it's not very good, but I am not responsible for how you feel about what I said. It's how you feel is your business. I know, it's not very good, but so, it's how people interpret. I could be consistently requesting an officer to fix a pothole down the road and they don't do it, and then they say he's harassing me, he keeps going on about it. Well, bloody fix it then. It's so I'm not entirely sure. Yes, we should not have harassment and bullying, right? But persistence and I'm known to be jocular on occasions, sometimes not very wise, right? And it's in context and reasonableness. So it's just, but will that come out through experience, again, through examples, and precedents? Thanks.
Not the session that I attended yesterday, but another session I attended a week or so ago, the indication I got is that a lot of the narrative comments that are going back in the consultation will be used to influence the guidance. And yes, valid point, Councillor England, but just as a slight counter to that, at law, the position, and certainly in terms of harassment, is it is the view of the recipient that is the test rather than the intention of the giver, if that makes sense. But again, it is subjective, and that's why employment tribunals happen quite often around these things, because it's whether it's a reasonably held view, I guess, is the real test. Whether it's a reasonably held view that might have amounted to bullying or might have amounted to harassment. But yes, to answer your question around the guidance, my understanding is that the narrative will be used to influence the guidance. Just on that point as well, I also added in, and this is something just for members to consider, and certainly I know the monitoring officer group with the LGA will be putting something in anyway, but it's about whether or not it needs to, whether it should go further for your statutory officers. So again, not in Telford and Wrekin, but some other authorities have had issues where their head of paid service, their 151 officer and their monitoring officer have potentially been exposed to bullying or harassment by virtue of the fact that they're in those statutory roles. And it's whether or not you feel the code should go further to expressly protect those statutory roles.
Any comments on that? Could you give us a little example of that, please, Anthea?
Yes.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No. So there have been instances that have been reported through professional networks where monitoring officers and 151 officers and heads of paid service to a greater or lesser extent have been subject to potentially unreasonable demands, asked to change their professional views, where they might be given advice that isn't welcome, but the pressure that's been placed on them has been quite significant, to the extent that the people who are in those roles have felt that they were being bullied until they would capitulate or acquiesce, I guess is the best way of describing it. And it's whether or not members feel that the code should provide for a particular reference to those statutory roles to prevent that. I guess it's probably covered in any event with the you must be civil and not bully and harass your officers, but it's a question to put out there to members to consider.
Jackie?
I would go along with that. That seems to be very reasonable.
So when you say you would go along with it, do you think there should be something extra in there?
Something extra in there, yes.
Yeah. Anybody else? I would also say there should be something extra in there myself. So how are we feeling?
Yeah.
Does everybody think? Sums up for that? Yep.
Okay, thank you. Is there sufficient reference to the use of social media? And I'm sorry I've said no to this, but I just feel it's glossed over, and I say this from my experience in the monitoring officer role. I would say probably about 90% of complaints that monitoring officers receive, and that's not just my experience, it's experience from talking to networks, is around social media. And the supplementary question is, should social media be covered in the code of conduct or in a separate code? And my view from a professional position is that there should be a separate code to cover social media. One, from the complaints that I've received, but also queries from members. So lots of members have said to me, is there a code, is there a social media policy? Do we have a protocol on social media usage? What is it that we should be doing? I'm conscious that that'll probably generate quite a lot of debate. So again, Chair, I'll hand it back over to you to open up the debate.
Do we have any queries on that? I'm in total agreement with what you've just said, Anthea. Councillor Peter Scott?
Yeah, thank you. I think social media is one of those things that's come amongst us and can be an absolute nightmare for everyone concerned. So the rules need to be quite strong on this from both sides, not just from councillors, but to people who engage with councillors as well. We have to know that there is a limit, there's a line which you must not cross. And I think some of the worst badgering I've had has been from other councillors on social media. And I really feel that it's improved a lot of late, which is very good, but we need to have very strict guidelines to tell us what is right and what is wrong, because I don't think some people realize it. And I think also with social media, one of the problems is it's 24 hours a day. And if it's 2 in the morning, you're on your second bottle of wine and you feel that you're grieved with something, you're likely to do and say the wrong thing. And I know we're advised not to do that or not to go on where we're angry. But again, I come back to the point that we are all human. And some people do that. So the stronger the ruling is on social media for all parties, the happier I personally will be. And I would absolutely back anything that makes it a safer place for us to converse.
Councillor Jackie Seymour, did you want to make a comment there?
Yeah, well, I would certainly agree with that. I think a separate code and spelling out in detail. Although I don't do much well, I'm in social media myself. Not my thing, but it I'm appalled by what I hear goes on. So I would support any action to have a strong code, and a separate one possibly would be appropriate.
I do think a lot of councillors do avoid social media. I know I'm one of them to a point, because of the repercussions. So I think it's very important that we do have something that covers it. Now, my question there, Anthea, is how do you feel you're going to go about that? That's a big, big issue to deal with, to cover.
Well, Chair, I think it's been I think Councillor Scott hit the nail on the head when he said social media has suddenly, although it's been around for quite some years now, it's suddenly appeared, and it's taken quite some time for all aspects of society to get up to speed with it. And so some authorities have had a stab, if you like, at drafting some sort of social media protocol. Others haven't. I think the intention is the LGA, if there's enough support to have a separate code, will do that for us. What I would say, because I think in the discussion just now, I think there's reference to the comments that are made to councillors as well, whether that's from other councillors or from members of the public, and it often feels like this is very one-sided. So this is, members can't do this, members must do that. They can't speak like that, but they must speak like this. But we do have certainly this authority has a suite of things that we do if a member feels that they are being subject to harassment via social media, and we've strengthened that. I think we did a report to this committee, I can't remember if it was the last meeting or the meeting before, where we discussed the support that's available to members if they feel that they're being harassed, not by other councillors, because that would be a code of conduct matter, but by members of the public, and what we can do to help members in those circumstances. So I just want to make it clear, although we are talking about member conduct tonight, that's because the consultations required that, but it's not to it's not to negate the fact that actually there needs to be some reciprocal behaviour from everybody that everybody has discourse with. So I just wanted to make that clear as well.
Yep. Everybody clear on that one? I think we've got a long way to go on that one myself.
It's forever developing, isn't it? And
Yeah.
technology is progressing so quickly that you'll have it one day and then the next day it'll be out of date. But at least if we get somewhere with it, it'll be better than the position that a lot of authorities are in at the moment. Councillor Arnold England, this is the comment about registration and declaration of interest. So this is, do you support or not that you should be declaring interest where matters relate to or affect other family members or associates? And the LGA has broadened the requirement. And so the first part of the question is to a great extent, to a moderate extent, to a small extent. And I've said yes, to a great extent. However, that's subject to the comments that the phrase close associate isn't defined in the model code of conduct, and it's open to interpretation from council to council, from person to person. And so either it needs to be removed in its entirety and just have it limited to family and friends. So, and friends, I think we heard the discussion yesterday, those people that were in that session. Friends is somebody you have a relationship with, you'd go on holiday with, you might go to the pub with, you're known to associate with them. But I think I question whether associates takes it any further actually in light of that. But I've suggested that either the phrase associates needs to be expanded upon or removed.
Councillor Arnold England?
Yeah, again, my humour says that it should be subject to so far as is reasonably practicable. And if I can give you an example, I've got a group of friends, and the son of one of them, yes, I do. The son of one of them is the owner of Exotic Zoo, and that has a relationship with the council. So would I have to declare that I know the dad of someone that does business with the council? Because that's what it means. That's how I feel it says. Okay.
And I think you could be right. And I don't think it's clear. So I think it either needs tightening up or it just needs to be removed, because I think it introduces uncertainty, not just for members, but for members of the public. And interest is something that does exercise members of the public, or can exercise members of the public.
Councillor Jackie Seymour?
Yes, I lost you there. The screen froze and you disappeared for quite some time. So anyway, on this particular one, I think it should be extended family, certainly, because there can be a lot of interest there. But associates, it's just too broad a term, and could involve, well, it would become impossible to monitor, I think.
Having heard what you've said, I think at that training session yesterday, they did define associates a lot better.
Well, they did indeed.
But if I may, Chair, they did, but then my view was that the definition that or the explanation they gave of an associate is actually a description of a friend, because you probably wouldn't go drinking and going on holiday, going to the pub, or going on holiday, or going out for a meal with somebody that you wouldn't consider to be a friend. And so it's whether or not the word associate adds anything to it, really.
Yeah.
Difficult one. So any other feelings? I'm picking up that we're limited on this one.
I think Councillor Arnold England would support the removal of the word associate, and I think Councillor Jackie Seymour would as well.
Yes.
And Nathan's thumbs up.
Okay, can I see a thumbs up on that one then, if we're all in agreement with that statement? Yeah. Yep. Thank you all.
We haven't got many more to go, Chair. I'm sorry for that, but I think this is the only way we can do this.
Yeah.
And then should the requirement to declare interest be in the main body of the code or in the appendix, because at the moment the requirement is in the appendix to the code. So my comment to that is the code needs to be as accessible, as easy to read as possible, and having appendices that are actually meant to include part of the obligations, I think, is unhelpful. I think if you've got an obligation, it should be an obligation in the code of conduct and not as an appendices. So that was my view on that.
I'm seeing some head shaking there, so I'm assuming everybody's a thumbs up with that one. Yes. Yep.
And then I've just reiterated the point about the fact that extending it beyond direct partner is something that a lot of authorities already do, and that the suggestion aligns with that, bearing in mind, but notwithstanding the comment about the word associates. So then question 13, this is about outside interests that should be registered. So at the moment, there's statutory minimums. So the law requires at the moment that if you have outside interests, and I'm just going to the wording of it. Sorry, I've skipped past it. Where you have outside interests that are financial, or where I've gone too far again. So where it's employment, sponsorship, any contracts that you might have with the authority, any land and property that you own, any licenses or any tenancies, or any, they call it securities, but it means shares really, or capital in a body, And the question that the LGA is asking is, do you think that's enough, or do you think it should go further? I think, just going back up to the comments that I've made, excuse me, I'm sorry.
No worries.
So, sorry, I've got that wrong. What I've just said to you is what we currently, this authority requires. And what the model code is suggesting aligns with what we already require in our declaration of interests form. The law has a much smaller definition of outside interest, so it's employment and land, and that's it really. And so it's, do you support that? Now, bearing in mind that's already what we require as an authority, I've suggested that you would support that to a great extent, because it's what you're already used to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everybody okay with the thumbs up for that one? Jackie? Sorry.
Yes, when we're talking about any organisation that you may be a member of, because that was all in that, wasn't it?
It's any organisation that you're in that you have a substantial control of. So you're either on the board, or you're a director, or
Right.
so it's not just being so I'm a member of the National Trust, but it wouldn't amount to an interest because I'm just a member of the National Trust. If I was on the board and had some element of control over it, then that would be an interest, because, and the reason and that's exactly what our code already requires us to, it requires members to do.
For example, I was a trustee of the Shropshire Wildlife Trust, which I used to declare.
Yes.
I'm no longer a trustee, but I continue as a member, but I don't have to declare that, don't I?
No. So the trustee position,
it's public body, yeah.
Yes, the trustee position is, that's the element of control, and it's because, as you know, council business and other bodies' business often overlap. And if you're in a position of control of one organisation and you can make decisions in your councillor role that affect it, you can't necessarily be seen to be independent. And so it's to protect members really, but we already provide for that in our codes, in our interests. So I didn't think it would be an issue really. Question 14. I think we've covered this. It's to what extent you support the requirement that councillors don't accept gifts, but as you've already indicated, you support that obligation to a great extent. I don't think there's anything more to add to that.
No.
We've already discussed the draft code, the gifts and hospitality of £25 limit. The only thing I would say is that the Committee for Standards on Public Life did suggest increasing it to £50, but that was considered by this committee either in February or June last year. I can't quite remember, and it was agreed to keep it at 25. So again, I've said that we would support it being 25.
Everybody in agreement with that? Sorry, Jack. Councillor Jackie Seymour?
It was over what period of time? And if we limit it to £25, does it mean a cumulative £25 over, say, a year? Is that what we would want it to mean? Because
well, I think
put a period in, have they?
They haven't put a period in, no. So it's any individual gift that is £25. So if you've got a bouquet of flowers worth £30, for example, that would be declarable. But also, if you got 2 bouquets of flowers from the same person that were £12.50 each, estimate obviously, then that would be declarable as well. So it's not over the period of time, it's the source of the gift.
Oh, right. Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
And that's what we do at the minute as well. That is our current position. So what the LG are suggesting doesn't differ from what the practice we currently adopt.
And it's at any one time. So 2 different people could give you something. Not that anybody ever has, but it could give you something in a few months apart, and so long as it didn't exceed £25, or you'd be all right.
Yes, so you could have I know this would never happen, but you could have 100 gifts of £20 from 100 different people. That's fine. But if you had 2 gifts from the same person that were £20, it would be declarable.
Yes, I get that now. Yep.
The penultimate question, I think it's the penultimate question, is reference to the guidance from the LGA. So they're going to be producing guidance, and they've given some examples of how that might be presented. And on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the most useful and 5 being the least useful, they want to know what you would find most useful. So I haven't taken a view on this because this is very subjective and it's not down to experience, it's down to personal preference. So the first one is regularly updated examples of case law. So as cases progress through court, which doesn't happen very often, I have to say, there's not much case law around code of conduct stuff. Would you find that being very useful on a scale of 1 to 5?
Would you like to put your fingers up, but very carefully at this point, and indicate what your opinions are on that? Councillor Arnold England? You're on
mute, Councillor England.
Right, I've read through them, and you know, different arguments. All could be number 1, or all could be number 5. So I think I mean, regularly updated examples of case law. I mean, that could be once in 10 years, so it's not at all important. But as Anthea knows, it's very important to me at the moment, right? Because of an issue that I've had. So I think explanatory guidance and case studies and examples of good practice would be up there. I would like another one that says that parish clerks are obliged to discuss these issues with their councillors rather than making their own personal response on behalf of the council.
Sorry, I think Councillor Seymour was indicating, Chair.
Councillor Seymour?
Well, I can't answer the last question that Arnold put, but as far as my personal opinion is concerned, that case studies and examples of good practice, I think ought to rate number 1, and the rest, it's very hard to split between them.
Chair, if I may, having heard the discussion tonight, perhaps if I rank them and then sent a note out to the committee and just got agreement, because I think having now heard the discussion, I've probably got a better sense of where we think they should be ranked. For example, social media policy, supplementary guidance for social media, I think is something that we would have up there based on the discussions that we've had tonight. So if you're happy with that suggestion, Chair, and the rest of your colleagues are, then I can send something out.
Everybody okay with that? Yes.
And then I believe this is the final question, which is just anything else. So I've put a suggested response in, which is we'd welcome provision which required members to sign a commitment to the code upon the commencement of each term of office. So if you're re-elected, each time you're re-elected, you sign again to the code, as well as for each authority that they may be members of. So where there's a member who's dual-hatted, triple-hatted, or even quadruple-hatted, that they sign for each individual authority rather than just one shop one size fits all. And then I've suggested that it might be useful to include a provision that the code of conduct training is mandatory for members, because at the moment there isn't a requirement for that, both on appointment to your initial term and then some refresher training at least upon re-election. And the reason I'm saying that is because, again, through experience, members often attend when they're initially elected, but then if they're very long standing, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, although I know it's normally in 4-year terms, so 10 and 15 probably don't work, but then that's a long time to go without necessarily attending any code of conduct training. I can see Councillor England's indicating, Chair, so
Councillor Arnold England?
Councillor England, you're on mute.
Again, for a change.
See, I'm so not used to being muted. Right, I totally agree with the thrust of the thing, to protect, reputations and be nice and honourable and all that. I totally agree with all that. The other side of the coin is, what about the rights of councillors? Right, not to have malicious accusations, to be dealt with honestly and fairly, in any inquiry, or grievance dispute. Grievance disputes, that the councillor should know what the grievance is. That the councillor, I've come across various things. Mediation, the ability to make representation, right? To know what the complaint is. All that's missing. What is the right of the councillor? Right? Because these people, a lot of these people put an awful lot of time and energy into representing the community, and anybody can come up with a complaint and they don't even know what it is or why they're being investigated. So I want that side of it, right, developed, right? And again, in a lot of the code of conduct material, it's and you covered this earlier. It says words like should. All right. Well, should means maybe if I feel like it. Yeah. So again, I would like it to be more explicit. So
Shall rather than should. Shall, will.
yeah, yeah. Okay, that's it. I'll mute myself again.
Chair, I think that's a valid point from Councillor England, and
Yeah.
and I think there's a great expectation on monitoring officers who do investigate code of conduct complaints, but actually what there isn't, although there's a lot of guidance available for monitoring officers, there isn't a standard process, policy, procedure that sets out how a monitoring officer will deal with a complaint, or how they will treat a member who's been subject to a complaint, and the reciprocal relationship. So I think if this committee is happy, although it's not strictly relevant to the code of conduct per se, it's a relevant side issue, and I could add some narrative around that. And again, I can circulate that to the committee before we submit the response.
I totally agree with that, because if you find yourself in a position where you're being investigated for any reason and you're not given any information, you're left out in the cold, it can be very uncomfortable.
Councillor Scott's indicating, Chair.
Councillor Peter Scott?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's an important point that Councillor England raises there, because again, you could be in a position of someone realizing that codes of conduct, etc., are a bit on the one-sided side, in as much as they think, well, I can have a go here, and there's nothing coming back at me, and if I can get at that person, then fine. But we should have rights, and the rights to know the full detail of any complaint from the moment it happens, and give our view and our version is very, very important. So totally support what Arnold has just said. What about the rights of the councillor? Absolutely.
I think that should be rights and expectations of, if you're under investigation, what do we expect from that councillor as well?
Yes, Chair, I can put some wording together and circulate it.
Wonderful.
But the 2 points that I raised, which were, could the code provide for mandatory code of conduct training at a specified period, whatever that might be, and for members to sign up to the code for each authority that they're in? Is that principle agreed? Are you happy for me to add that narrative? I can see nods. Councillor Arnold England, I can't see you at the moment.
No, he's missing, missing in action, but I think he'd agree with that.
He is missing. He's leaving apparently. Kieran, could we try and add Arnold back? I don't know if that was Councillor Nathan England. Do you know if he was time constrained, or should we try and get him back?
No, he should be able to come back, but feel free to leave him off.
Actually, I'm not sure he's back. I think he's back.
Okay.
I'm back. Can you hear me? See me?
Yes. Okay. Can't see you,
we
Councillor
can hear
England,
you.
but we can hear you.
See me? Oh no. The
No.
camera went on. Can you see?
Oh.
I can see me.
Yes, I can see you now. Yeah.
Oh, bloody computers.
So,
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
so then the other suggestion that I've made is that it is just repeating what I've already said about the personal tense and the passive tense, that the personal tense works well if you are expecting members to sign it, but actually for inclusion in the Constitution, passive tense would be better, or third person. And again, the rest of it's just repeating what I've already said. So I don't think I need to labour the point, Chair. And that was everything. And actually, that's taken slightly less time than I thought it could.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Anthea. That was very concise and informative.
Right.
Right.
Thank you,
Does
Chair.
anybody have any other comments there at all?
Are we going to start the agenda now?
I'm hoping we finish the agenda now. But I'm sure if you do have any other comments, if you want to contact myself or Anthea, that we'll be happy to answer anything we might, or try and get together to formulate some answers for you.
Okay. Can I thank Anthea for all the work pulling this together?
Here, here.
I
know
think
she did-
Anthea's done absolutely amazing. I will say this throughout the COVID, because I know she's not just had this meeting to deal with, she's had a lot of others, and I'm sure she's been pulled from pillar to post. And thank you very much, Anthea.
Thank you, Chair. It's with the support of a very good team behind me as well.
Yes. Thanks to you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you. Good night.